study guide, we have to go over types of joints, fibrous, cartilaginous, synovial. And I'm going to say something good about your lab book. It actually has really nice examples of those, decent pictures. But after that, then we have to go over types of movements. And this will not be hard. This will be the same thing that you heard in lecture, but we're going to add some other things to it. Sorry, let me rephrase. This will not be hard. It'll be the same thing that we did in lecture. Now I'm going to rephrase. But I'm going to give you the things that were already in lecture, you already heard, that were not listed on this study guide. So here they talked about flexion, extension, hyperextension, abduction, adduction, circumduction, rotation. Those are on the list for the study guide, yes? Mm-hmm. I'm going to add pronation, supination, inversion, eversion, dorsiflexion, and plantar flexion. Good? Okay, so we're going to do all the same ones we did in lab. Let's jump into it so we can do it. In your lab book, where they go over types of joints, and they talk about fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. I'm going to look for the exact page that I liked in your lab book where you did it. But it's easy to understand. Fibrous joints are held together with fibers, and there is a lovely table on page 230 in your lab book. Hey, everybody pull this up on your phone so I can instead project what's in your lab book, so I don't think everyone brought their lab book with them. So pull up the study guide on your phone, and we will put this here. So on page 230 of your lab book for fibrous joints, it has this table 10.2, classification of fibrous joints. Oh, that's the wrong direction. There we go, that's better. All right, so we're going to talk about a gomphosis, a suture, and a syndesmosis. All right, and you can look at each one of these. It has a nice structure and description, example, and a word origin. Here they have the same stuff on page 231 with pictures instead of words. Are you with me? All right, so that's what we're going to do. And you know some of these already. A suture, I'm going to zoom in real close to make it more obvious. All of the stuff you see happening right here, you're actually seeing little connective tissue fibers tying those two bones together. That happens at a suture. So this is a sutural joint, and because it's tied together by little connective tissue fibers, we know that a suture is a type of fibrous joint. Good? Now, the gomphosis, it's a fancy name for a tooth socket. We have a tooth in a socket, and down here, tooth and socket, we have what we call the periodontal ligament. That is, they're calling periodontal intermembrane, but that's a bunch of fibers tying the tooth into the socket. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. All right. So that would be a gomphosis. All right. And here, where we have an ulna and a radius held together by a large band of connective tissue here, this one is going to be the syndesmosis, all right? But let's go ahead and read the fancy words as we do this. All right, so a gomphosis, a cone-shaped peg fitting into a socket anchored by the periodontal ligament. It's an immovable joint, at least it should be. We've already talked about how if someone doesn't get their vitamin C, they get scurvy and their teeth fall out. But if you're healthy, teeth articulating with the alveolar processes of the mandible or maxilla. Remember, the alveolar margin was where the tooth sockets were. All they're saying is teeth being held into their socket by the periodontal membrane, periodontal ligaments. Okay, are we good with that? So that is a immovable, hopefully it stays that way. A suture, we've got these in the skull. You remember we already talked about those. Here we have a coronal suture that's between the frontal bones and the parietal bones. Here between the two parietal bones we have a sagittal suture. You might remember around the two temporal bones we had the squamosal suture, and around the occipital bone at the back we had the lambdoidal suture. Everybody good with that? Okay. So what is a suture? These are just between skull bones. And you have sutural ligaments, we're talking about little connective tissue fibers that hold the two together, and this should not move. If my parietal bone slipped back and forth like that, You're tearing fibers, ligament, and you are breaking bone, because remember, the edges of the bones are not clean and smooth. They're wiggles stuck in together. Good? Okay? So that's a sutural joint. And the syndesmosis, large surfaces of bones anchored together by the connective tissue membrane called the interosseous membrane. Interosseous means between the bones. That's not hard to understand, and slightly movable. I'll give you an example. We can do this, yes? We can do that. Why can we do it? Because you know that right up here we've talked about this, but it wasn't on the list. The ulna has a spot on the side of it, below the head, that is called the radial notch, where the head of the radius fits in, and the radius can turn inside the radial notch of the ulna. Okay? This interosseous membrane, this is a syndesmosis, and it cannot be too tight, or you wouldn't be able to rotate the radius. Does that make sense? All right. So we've done 3 types of fibrous joints. Now we're going to do cartilaginous joints. And here they have 2. Does the table continue on the next page? No, it only has 2. Okay. So we're going to talk about a syndesmosis, bone connected to bone by hyaline cartilage, immovable joint. And so think of the epiphysis hooked to the diaphysis by the epiphyseal growth plate. That is definitely supposed to be immovable. Now a symphysis, a bone connected to bone by fibrocartilage, slightly movable. You know we have that where the 2 pelvic bones come together. That's a symphysis, right? Okay. Let's go here and look at these. I'm going to zoom out. This is in your lab book on 232. And what we were just looking at before was 231. So when we are looking at this, let's classify these. There were only 2 options there. So this would be a syndesmosis. It's not supposed to move. We're not supposed to have these separate. If we do, we've got a broken bone. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's easy. This is a pubic symphysis. We know that's fibrocartilage. That's easy. This, the costal cartilages that hook the ribs to the sternum, those are hyaline cartilage, and that is one that, according to their definition, making us use 1 or 2, they would be probably calling that a synchondrosis, but we already talked about the fact that the amount of movement varies with age. If you're really young and you haven't put a lot of minerals into the cartilage, it's pretty flexible, and that's why young kids, like little kids playing Little League, if a baseball hits them in the chest, it can actually cause a heart attack, and that happens every year somewhere in the U.S. So there's an example of slight movement. And here, this is, I never would have thought of calling this a symphysis, but I will admit we got bone coming to bone, and we got fibrocartilage in between. We're talking about the intervertebral disc between the bodies of the vertebrae, yes? Okay, so that one's closest to the one they're calling a symphysis, but I don't really like that. But it does. We do know that our vertebrae can move. Let's do a little bit of movement here, yes? So it's got to be that of the 2. That's the problem with drawing definitions. Don't always work. Now, a synovial membrane, that's the next one. And they have real nice here, table 10.4 on page 233. It's the parts of the synovial joint. Now, we've talked about this before. We had a similar picture in a lecture on one of the PowerPoints. The difference there was they used green instead of purple for the synovial membrane. But you already know there's a fibrous joint capsule. You know, inside that we have articular cartilages. You know that there's a joint space between the cartilages that's usually filled with synovial fluid made by the synovial membranes. What it does is lubricate so you don't have the cartilage rubbing on the cartilage with as much friction. Does that sound familiar? And you can see on the outside of the capsule, on this side, we have a ligament that hooks the proximal bone to the distal bone. Good? That would be an extracapsular ligament. If we were like looking at the knee, and we have the 2 that crisscross in here, this would be the ACL and PCL. Those would be considered intracapsular ligaments. So those are ligaments that are in the joint capsule. They're inside of it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So ones that are outside the joint capsule are extrinsic. Ones that are fused to the joint capsule and look like a thick part of the wall, those are intrinsic ligaments. And ones that are inside of the capsule, those are intracapsular ligaments. Are we good so far? All right, so let's now go to the next classification table. It goes over examples. We just went over a generic synovial membrane. We're now going over specific types. A ball and socket. We've got two types of ball and sockets that I can think of off the top of my head. We have the hip joint and we have the shoulder joint. Those are ball and sockets. Okay. If we look at the hip, what we are talking about, the ball is the head of the femur. The socket is the acetabulum that it goes into. Does that make sense? The acetabulum is part of this coxal bone, the os coccyx, that has the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Remember, all three of those together form the acetabulum. Are we good? This is tied in there pretty well, and the acetabulum is pretty deep. It surrounds that head pretty good. Now, the shoulder, the head of the humerus is the ball. But that's not a big ball. It's only just a curved portion on the proximal end, right? It's not a ball like the head of the femur. And the socket, which is the glenoid surface of the scapula, that's not like a deep socket already. It's more like a little shallow depression. What that means is that ball and socket joint, you've got your ball-ish, your socket-ish, but it doesn't have thick wall wrapped around. So it can be more easily dislocated. It's easier to dislocate a shoulder than a hip. Does that make sense? And that's the reason why, because the ball and socket, it's not as well defined. You don't have the ball going as deep into the socket. But those are ball and socket. And let's see, structural, let's go ahead and read. I'll put on my readers here. So spherical head goes into a concave socket. Multi-axial. Earlier in lecture, we described that as a triaxial joint because they can move in three different directions. Does this sound familiar? Okay. Now, hip joint, shoulder joint, yeah. And yeah, I don't care about the where the words came from. Now, a condylar joint, a condyle was a rounded articular surface. You remember that? Okay. So, if you were dealing with they're probably going to go with the metacarpal to the phalanges, the top of this phalanx, it's a little scooped out, and the end of this metacarpal, it's a little rounded. They come together, so they're kind of like ball and socket-ish, but not deep enough to be a full ball and socket. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's look at their definition now. Condylar. Convex oval surface, that would be the distal end. In the example I gave, the distal end of the metacarpal fits into an elliptical concavity. That would be the proximal end of the phalanx. All right. These are biaxial. They can move in two directions. Watch, I could do this, or I could do this with my finger. Either one, and so that's why it's biaxial. It can move in two directions. Now, your wrist joint. Okay, and your metacarpal phalangeal, that's the one I just talked about, metacarpal phalangeal. But your wrist joints, I actually would have called that a gliding joint, personally, instead of a condylar joint, but sure, we'll work with that. Okay, the hinge joint. We're talking here about your knee and about your elbow. So you have a convex surface fits into a concave surface. The convex surface here is the trochlea on the distal end of your humerus. And the concave surface is the trochlear notch on the proximal end of the ulna. Does this make sense? Okay. At least when you're dealing with the elbow. All right. Now, these hinge joints are uniaxial. Let me say it another way. My elbow likes to move like this. It does not want to have someone hold this steady and then bend that way. That would be very painful and break my elbow. Okay. So they want to move in one direction. And the knee and the elbow are the examples. We've got that. A pivot joint, this would be a pivot joint right here. What we're doing is having the head and C1, the atlas, move. What they're doing is rotating around the dens, the sticky uppy part of C2, the the axis. Does that sound good? That makes sense? Sound familiar? All right. Okay, so that's a hinge joint. And, sorry, I said hinge, that's a pivot joint. Okay, so they're pivoting around the part that's sticking up. So round surface fits into a ring formed by a ligament and a depression in another bone. So we've got two examples of that we could talk about. We have the one right here that we just mentioned between atlas and axis. We also have the one that I talked about before earlier, where we have the radial notch of the ulna and the head of the radius fits into it and we can rotate it like that. That's a pivot joint. Good? All right. So we've got that example there. Atlantoaxial is the one they use there. Now a plane joint where two flat surfaces come together. Some of the carpal, some of the tarsal. So the fact that we can do this and this, that's what we're talking about here with plane joints, okay? Uniaxial, one bone moves in one direction, one goes in another direction. Below that, the saddle joint. The big example that everyone uses is the base of the thumb talking to the carpal bones. Yeah, so you can have this movement or this movement because it feels kind of like a ball and socket because you have movement in different directions, but it's not caused by this. It's caused by one bone doing this and the other doing this. Each one looks like the surface of a saddle where you put your butt down, and if you're riding the horse, you just slide forward and back in the saddle. Does this make sense? Are we good? All right, and they've got pictures of them right there for different synovial joints. That's on page 235 of your lab book. Okay, so objective 1, describe the fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial joints. I think we've got that. Do you agree? All right, so the next objective, objective 2, demonstrate and identify the various body movements. And we're talking about things here that we did in lab before when we were talking about flexion and extension. I want you to remember, everybody write this down if you haven't written it down already. Flexion is taking an angle and decreasing the number of degrees. So if I went from 90-degree angle to 45 or 30-degree angle, that's flexion. Okay, this would be flexion. Same thing, let's do it here on a skeleton. Bring this over. Right now, with the arm fully extended, this would be 180 degrees, yes? If I change that to 90 degrees, I flexed the elbow. If I go from 90 to 45, I flex the elbow again. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. If you go from the 45 to 90 or the 90 to 180, you extend the joint. So flexion, fewer angles, moving from something to less, and then extension, moving to more. Everybody good with that? Mm-hmm. All right. So we understand flexion and extension. Now the next ones on the list are hyperextension. I'm not going to demonstrate that with my back because it hurts, but I will do it with my neck. The example that's in the book, and what I'm doing here, I'm putting up the old lab book. I would recommend everybody take in fact, let's go back one more. Here. What I want you guys to do, everybody photograph this. These are the same illustrations, except they have white background instead of black, that are in your lecture PowerPoint. Are you guys good, or do you want me to zoom in? Okay. All right. Well, this would be flexion of the neck. This would be extension of the neck. That would be hyperextension, where you go further back. Does that make sense? You don't just extend it, you extend it further than the normal. It's hyper, more than normal. All right, so we've got that. Here, on the knee, flexion and extension are really easy to understand, just like we've been talking about. On the arm, it's a little trickier, and the reason why, let's see, here we go. You might think, how is this, okay? Oh, sorry, you might think, how is this going to be flexion when we're raising the arm? It's that the angle they're talking about is this, that angle. It's not the angle from the torso to the arm. It's the neck to the arm. So this is flexion. You see, it gets to fewer degrees. And extension would be bringing it down. And hyperextension is bringing it past your torso. Everyone good with that? So that's why the arm is a little tricky. Okay. Now, let me erase that really quick. I would say, even though you have this in your lecture PowerPoint, I think everybody should take a photo, and then I will move it up so you can get the bottom row too. Okay. Everybody good? Mm-hmm. All right. So the next two pictures, we have abduction, adduction, circumduction. Let's go through those. If we abduct, we are moving the limb away, like it was stolen from the body. Does that make sense? Anything, arm, leg, doesn't matter. If you're moving away from the midline, you're abducting it. If you're bringing it back towards the middle of the body, you're adducting, like you're adding the mass. A great example of that, figure skaters. If they go and jump up for the fancy spin kind of jump, they will adduct their arms to go really fast. And when it's time to slow down to stick the landing without breaking an ankle, they will abduct their arms. That abducts the mass, and because the mass moves out, it slows the rotation. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So abduction, adduction, that's easy. Circumduction, if you can make a circle with the end of a limb, that's circumduction. And that is usually a ball and socket joint. So shoulder can do circumduction, hip can do circumduction. Yes?
When you finish this, can I take a picture of the top again?
Yeah, let me pull it down. You can do it right now.
Thank you.
Okay, good. All right, so you guys good with this so far?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to add the ones that are not on your list, but they were in the PowerPoint. We're going to do these too. So we have pronation, supination, we have inversion, eversion. Let's do the foot ones first because that's easier. All right, so let me move this out of the way. And if you are inverting, you're taking the foot and moving to the midline of the body. Suppose I was trying to take something on the ground that was over here and bring it to the middle. That would be inverting because I'm bringing it into the middle of the body. If I was trying to push it away from the body, make it exit the area of my body, I would be everting. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Taking the bottom of the foot and doing that, you're everting. Taking the bottom of the foot, bringing it in, you're inverting. Good? Okay. So that wasn't bad. Now, the next one that I really don't like, any movement with the ankle up or down, they're going to call flexion. I know. So if I take my toes and bring them upward towards the sky and towards my back, if I could go far enough, that's dorsiflexion, towards the back. Does that make sense? Toes coming towards your back. If instead you bring your toes towards the ground, towards the plants, like the grass on the ground that you're going to step on, that's plantar flexion. Are we good? Mm-hmm. All right. So you've got the feet ones, and now the last of the movements, and I think this is an important one to know because we're going to use these later in names of muscles. The supination and the pronation. So, say you walk into you're a crime scene investigator. You walk in, you find a crime, you find the victim laying there. They're laying on their stomach, on their chest, their hands touching the ground, palms touching the ground. We would say that the body was found in a prone position. So, if we are rotating, so we take our thumbs from the lateral to the medial, and that means that puts our palms downward, that is a prone position. If palms down, it's prone. Does that make sense? Now, if we did the opposite, if we take our thumbs that are in the medial and move them to the lateral, we call that supination. And the way I would remember that is we're rotating our hands like we want to hold a bowl of soup. So this is supination. Yeah, it's a good mnemonic.
I love soup.
I invented it myself. I'm very proud of it. Okay, but does that make sense? Are we good? Okay, so supination, pronation. And if you're confused when you look at an image about what it's doing, Read carefully what direction, or look carefully what direction the thumbs are moving. Remember, if the thumbs are going from medial to lateral, it's supination. If the thumbs are going from lateral to medial, that's pronation. Everybody good? All right. So we've gone through all of those movements. I think we are done with articulations. All right. You can cut the video off. We're going to continue going when we talk about